What is going on, everybody? This is the PWZ podcast. I am Rick Del Santo, and joining me today, the big cat, the Greenport Destroyer, Andy Nichols. We have not
Where is
seen
he?
you in over a year, and you are here back tonight for the PWZ podcast. Welcome.
I'm looking for this guy you're talking about. Where is he?
I'm happy to have you back here, man. It's been a year, and or maybe more, trying to get your ass back on here. Thought that always enjoyed talking the world of professional wrestling with you, my friend.
Shout out to my buddy Big Daddy. There you go, Big Daddy. You like that?
There you go. There you go. He's a big Mets fan. There you go. I'm drinking Irish ginger ale tonight. I bet you never had that. Does your store carry that?
Most likely, but could you explain the difference between ginger ale and Irish ginger ale?
I don't know. It just says Irish ginger ale, and I've kind of. What's the name of the brand? It's Franny's Irish Ginger Ale. They also make like a vanilla cream soda and a black cherry and some other such flavors. But this one has become my favorite.
Franny's, you hear that? We're looking for an endorsement deal here, okay?
There you go.
Help us out.
I'm loving it. So, what's been going on in your life in that you've chosen in the world of professional wrestling? What have you been up with?
So much stuff going on right now, Rick. And you and I talk on the phone. We don't really like you said. We haven't done a podcast together in well over a year, about a year and a half, probably.
Yeah.
But man, the world of wrestling's changed a lot in that year and a half, hasn't it?
It's gotten crazy. I mean, live events have started happening again. I think when you and I were doing podcasts on a somewhat regular basis back then, live events weren't completely happening. I don't think there was any
I don't think there was.
And I think WWE was still doing the Thunderdome. Is that what it was called? I can't even remember that far back. Jesus. And I think that AEW was doing the employees only in the crowd.
Yeah. A lot has changed. I mean, we thought that was the craziest point in pro wrestling, and as month by month, things get crazier and crazier. I mean, I'm sure you talked about Vince and you talked about all the ongoing stories there, Triple H, Stephanie. So we're not going to rehash all that, but it's crazy, man. Like the last 2 or 3 years of pro wrestling, it's just like nonstop. Like, what's going to happen next week? You know what I mean?
Just give the last month alone. Like you said, the Vince story, but now we found out, and then there was obviously like Sasha and Naomi. And God knows how much of that is, whatever, legit, whatever, or what's going on with them. I heard there's rumors about them coming back soon, but we'll have to see. But of course, one of the things that I want to bring up, because I don't think you and I have really discussed it much. We haven't discussed it on the show because there hasn't been a show all week. So I'm glad you're here. So this subject, which I wanted to bring up, was that Johnny Laurinaitis had been released, but it wasn't announced, but it was confirmed earlier this week by Mike Johnson, a PW Insider.
Yeah, I think we talked about that on the phone the other night. It was just like we all kind of knew it was going to happen. It was a foregone conclusion. But yeah, they didn't really there was no fanfare about the announcement. It was just kind of like, okay, next, forget about this guy. You know what I mean? We all knew it was going to happen. It wasn't a big shock, but
yeah, I guess they're just finally living up to their, as more and more information comes out about that subject.
That's all part and parcel with the whole Vince scandal and everything. But on the brighter side of things, that now every day there's new news with Triple H. There's, like you said, rumors of Sasha and Naomi coming back. We saw Dexter Lumis come back. We saw Karrion Kross come back last Friday night. A huge spot. Huge.
Yeah.
Both guys, actually, because Dexter Lumis came on at the end of the show, too. And I think they're trying to create some buzz and stir maybe with the internet fans by doing that Dexter Lumis thing, And now the latest rumor for tomorrow night, if you haven't heard it, is that Top Dollar might be showing up.
Really?
Yeah, and pardon me, I apologize, but the other guy in the Hit Row stable, Adonis, I can't remember his last name, that he's supposed to be coming with him. So we'll see what happens with that. But it seems
Okay.
like Triple H is kind of like bringing his people back in, bringing his troops back together. You know what I mean?
I'm glad that you mentioned that the Carrying Cross, excuse me, and Dexter Loomis. There was Carrying Cross came back with a huge impact. I thought it was done very well. The crowd kind of went a little nuts for it. At least I think they did. The Dexter Loomis thing, if you were watching AJ in the ring, it was just kind of something that happened in the background until WWE had posted on social media and YouTube where they posted up closer shots of it. But if you were watching as a fan on your couch, you would have just saw security over at the barrier pulling a guy away. And that was it.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying. I think like the Loomis thing was to try to get the internet buzz going. Like, what's this going on? Who's that guy in the crowd? What happened? And
Yeah.
then you see it's Dexter Loomis. So you have all now you're involved in it. You're excited about what's going on in the crowd, and then you can attach it to a superstar or a wrestler. Can we call them wrestlers now? We can do that,
I
right?
think we're allowed to. That those are no longer wrestling and wrestler and are no longer banned words. So as
So,
of last week.
so Loomis, who's kind of been sitting on the sidelines doing some indie work and such, now all of a sudden he's got a huge buzz because it was a controversial segment, you know.
Yeah, and if you the announcer kind of like said sort of under his away from the microphone, but you can hear them just enough to try to get the attention that is that Dexter Loomis? Like kind of to that tone. Then as you see security pulling him away, you don't really see it on the raw footage, but if you see it on the social media closer up footage as they're pulling him away, you can kind of hear the crowd going a little bit crazy and getting behind it. So that part I liked.
And I think it's going to be interesting because I think we're going to see a lot of that, playing to the internet crowd, the Twitter crowd, trying to create buzz. Because, and we talked about this before too. And I know I keep saying that, right? Oh, we talk about this, but we do. Like that's the new way to get heat is through Twitter and, involving real life storylines. Now, what's a real life storyline? Dexter Loomis got released. Dexter Loomis lost his job. Now he pops up in the crowd. What's he doing here? You know what I mean? And I think we're going to see more booking like that, playing to the internet audience, trying to get some buzz that way.
So both weeks, basically, we saw Triple H guys come back. Basically, guys that were released during the pandemic and the Nick Khan, I almost called him Russo, Vince McMahon era towards the end. H is taken over, and it seems that it's going in a whole nother direction. He's bringing these guys that he really believed in. Now, my other question is, what do you think is going to happen with NXT? Do you think that it's going to go back to the way it was, or they're going to keep this, as like a super indie, or do you think it's going to go towards the developmental that they've been for almost a year now?
That's a very good question. I just read an article. I guess Shawn Michaels did an interview, and he took the heat. He took the brunt of the whole new face of NXT. He said there's no way Vince and Bruce Pritchard were involved creatively. It all went through Shawn Michaels, and his crew would, he was the head of that. And he said, if good, bad, or indifferent, he says, I'm the bottom line to NXT. I do think you're going to see him continue that. I do think you're going to see Triple H maybe have some influence, say, hey, get some more of the main roster guys, a little crossover, which they've done before, but I think we might see more of it. I hope so anyway, because I think it's cool when you see like an Apollo Crews kind of go get a fresh start, or even a Dolph Ziggler, guys who are just really good talent, but they're stale on the main roster, and go freshen them up, and it's kind of like if you remember, we didn't know it so much back then, but WWE would send talent to like Paul Heyman and say, hey, here's Al Snow, we need you to do something with his character.
Right.
So Al Snow would take him to ECW, revamp him, and then you get a fresh Al Snow coming back to WWE later on, so maybe we'll see some of that.
I think it happened in OVW as well. He would send guys down there to work, or sometimes with independents and such like that. So it would end up working, like you said, if they got a little stale on the main roster, they need to work with a little bit different talent and just guess, get reignited, so to
See,
speak.
we live in a different era, so you can't take a guy who works, the New York territory, send him to Memphis for 6 months, put a
Right.
new coat of paint on him, and bring him back, because everybody sees everything, whether it's on YouTube or a streaming service. Everything's out there. You know what I mean? So it's a lot tougher in this day and age. So you have to be a little more creative in finding ways to freshen up talent.
People are out there with their cell phones recording some indie shows, and they end up on YouTube and such. All that kind of stuff. So it's hard to hide like it did back in the day. Like you said, the territory system. Guy got stale in Georgia, they'd send him to Oregon or New York for a few months. So it's a whole different beast. In the last 15, 20 years, it's the internet is what it is.
Absolutely, like you talked about, sending guys to OVW, or they'd send guys to Memphis all the time. And you can't do that with NXT, because it's right there on the same network. It's right there on network television, so you can't hide it. But I think fans are smart enough to understand it's a different product. So if you bring somebody over there, that they are going to develop a different character, or they might change or adapt a little bit. And I think fans will accept that.
Speaking of territories, what do you think? Now, I guess Vice has announced that there's going to be a TV show with the extension of from Dark Side of the Ring. I guess it's the same producers. The Rock is going to be involved. It's going to be called Death of the Territories.
Dude, first of all, everything The Rock touches turns to gold. Second of all the work that these guys who have done the Dark Side of the Ring episodes has been tremendous. Now, I know the most recent season was a little more controversial. People getting on them about the Flair episode, or the plane ride episode and all. But the guys do, they do their research. Hopefully, they'll have the participation, because I know a lot of people started saying they're not going to work with them as much since the fallout with Tommy Dreamer, Ric Flair, and all those guys. But I think with Rocky behind it, that's going to open up even more doors in a lot of ways. You know what I mean?
Excuse me, I misspoke. It's a Tale of the Territories.
Okay.
My bad. So,
shame. Well, that changes my whole opinion. My opinion changes now. But you know what I mean?
No, I get what you're saying. I'm very interested, because really that's like my favorite era. Of course, growing up, you and I, we're roughly around the same age. The territories were really dying at the time. It's probably there was very few of them left growing up. We were basically based in New York, Connecticut, but like I'm Connecticut, you're New York, Northeast. But the biggest company out of the Northeast was taking over the entire world at that time as we were growing up, killing off every other territory. There was very few. I think, Don Owen was the last remaining territory? Maybe.
It was Northwest. Okay.
Yeah, Pacific.
I'm not 100% sure. Well, Memphis carried on, though.
That's true, too. They carried on. They carried on well into the late 90s, I believe, right? And I believe Corey Macklin tried to continue Memphis wrestling in the 2000s. I remember.
And there were different incarnations and stuff, but that was pretty continuous. But you're right. I mean, I remember being a kid watching, in the '80s, watching WWE, WWF, Hulkamania era, and all of a sudden you're starting to see they'd show little videos for Mr. Wrestling 2 or the Spoiler, Junkyard Dog, whoever, and next thing you know, with the exception of JYD, most of those guys were just coming in and they were glorified jobbers, like guys like Mr. Wrestling 2 and the Spoiler,
Right.
It was a very weird time. You read about these guys in the magazine and you saw them as these big monster stars, and then Vince would get them in and say, you know what? They're not going over my guys.
Look at that. Dirty Dick Slater was a huge star in the territories. Comes into WWF in 1987 as the Rebel. And they tried building him up as this, Southern babyface, and it just didn't work. So it happened. And then a lot of guys, like you said, they would bring guys in and job them out. Look at Mr. Electricity, Steve Regal, somebody like that, former AWA light heavyweight champion. And he went in there and he's sitting there jobbing out every week on national TV. But I'm sure the paychecks were very nice, though.
Yeah, I will say this about Steven Regal, and not to shoot a hole in your example, but Mr. Electricity, he was almost like the Denny Brown of the AWA, in a sense that if you look at the results, he wasn't winning a whole lot of matches. If he happened to fight another junior heavyweight, then he'd win. But then again, he was a tag team champion with Jim Garvin, if you remember that. I think they beat the Road Warriors, didn't they?
I believe you're correct.
Controversially, of course. But.
What are you talking about? There's no controversy in professional wrestling. Not going up against the Road Warriors.
But yeah, no, it was funny. Like you said, you start seeing these guys, even a guy probably people don't remember, but like a Spike Huber from Missouri. He was like one of the big stars. I'd see him in the results all the time. He'd be main eventing, winning matches, and all of a sudden he shows up on WWE TV. He's a jobber. It's crazy, man. It was a crazy time, very crazy time.
I mean, you'd see guys it's funny because sometimes you'd see guys from like the NWA or WCW, whatever, White Lightning, Tim Horner. He's now, mind you, he wasn't like fantastic in the NWA. He was very good at what he did. He was very fast, had really great matches, but he'd come into the WWE and he was jobbing out every single week. But he would do good in the television title. What do they call it? Not category, but whatever it is at that time period. And it's just like guys like that would get really good recognition in the National Wrestling Alliance or even the AWA, and they would come over and Vince would look at them just like, nobody knows who you are. Bob Bradley was the Texas heavyweight champion. He comes in the WWF and he's jobbing every week right after his Texas title reign.
And then you remember guys like Ron Bass. Vince would bring in like Ron. There's a bunch of them, man. Vince would bring in like a guy like Ron Bass, and he was in these blood feuds in Florida and the Carolinas, and then he's basically a mid-carder at best, once he gets to WWE.
Black Bart was world-class heavyweight champion and mid-Atlantic champion, I believe. He comes in and he's jobbing every week to getting annihilated by the Road Warriors in 1989 or 1990, I should say. So it's crazy, man. It's really wild to think about guys that like you would see on one show, like you said, in bloody feuds, crazy feuds, and then come in and just get this shit kicked out of them every week by a different,
And then there's an example like the Bushwhackers. It's like you and I shouldn't speak for you, but I'm going to guess you're like me. You'd rather have the Sheep Herders over the Bushwhackers.
Now, one of the things is, of course, I discovered them a little bit later, but I do remember their tenure in, like, say, was it the UWF, and then coming over to the NWA, having that intense bloody feud with the Fantastics, and then all of a sudden they come in. It's just like, wait a second, that's the Sheep Herders. They're bopping their heads, bopping their arms, and they're just like doing this comedy stuff. I'm like, what the hell's going on here?
Which is funny. Huh?
But you could look at them. They got the scars in their head from all the blood and all that stuff. It's just they made them this comedic. I don't know how Vince thought that these guys were marketable, but he found a way.
And it was funny because, as being older now and kind of looking at things from a different angle, it's like at the time I hated it, but now I look back and I'm like, good for those guys because they didn't have to bleed and get stuck in barbed wire every night. They could just go around and lick foreheads and do the whole, and have an easy 5-minute match and go home, So good for them at that point in their career.
I think a lot of guys were happy at that time because they saw the money. They saw that there was on cable TV. They saw that they were going to be getting paid a super ton of money. And they were like, well, I don't care how long it is. I'm going to take this money here while it's offered. And guess what? I get to barely do shit. Not to say that they barely did anything, but it's like they don't have to be wrapped in barbed wire. They don't have to be blading. They don't have to be having these insane matches like, the Sheep Herders or like you said, Black Bart was another one that had, or Ron Bass was another one that had crazy bloody matches.
Yeah, and it's if you look at that era, it's just like I don't think work rate was the same as now. Like we live in a work rate era now, where everybody bases everything on work rate. They don't care about the character. But there is more like the believability. Like once you came to WWF, believability wasn't as much of a factor. It's like
Right.
the characters are more outlandish, were wilder. You had guys like Outback Jack running around, a genius Lanny Poffo running around. So it wasn't like, the NWA at the time, or Mid South even, or UWF was like Macho Man against Macho Man. And I don't mean Randy Savage. I just mean, two tough guys, and they're going to have a contest to see who's the biggest and the baddest, and who. WWE was just kind of like, okay, who's the craziest character, at that
Right.
period.
Right.
It was,
Yeah. Who was? I mean, and don't forget that this stuff was just starting in the '80s. Don't forget into the '90s, it got a little bit crazier up until what was it, 1994, '95, where everybody had a secondary gimmick, a secondary job, like Duke the Dumpster Drosy and the Body Donnas and stuff like that. It only got crazier as time went on.
Doink the Clown and, all that stuff,
IRS, Mike Rotunda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
which is funny because, like, you get a guy like Rotunda, and that's kind of what, speaking to what you said earlier, it's like you get a guy like Rotunda who everybody knows he's been in every single territory, but that's that Vince thing, and he still did it up until his retirement, and people still act shocked by it, but he has to put his stamp and his brand on everything.
yeah, it's all about copyright and merchandising and such like that because of him, for him. Rather, it's just a really crazy thing that he just needed to do all that stuff. He would take a very well-known wrestler and just change him. Somebody that's been there before, such as uh, uh, Mike Rotunda. He was there and a former tag team champion. He had 2 runs prior to the IRS gimmick and came back. People,
Well,
Dan Spivey was there too. Just and he
Barry
changed.
Windham, the Widowmaker, and
Yeah.
But getting back to the start of this conversation, we're talking about Triple H and Stephanie, and I think that's something we're going to see less of now. I think that I hope that Triple H is going to let guys come in and say, "Hey, you're so and so on the Indies. You built your name. We want you for the name that you've built." You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, a lot of times, and I think that had something to do with the reason why certain guys would not sign there. Catch me what I'm saying? Guys like Omega and guys like the Bucks and stuff like that. They all had shots to get in there, but I think that they wanted to build their own brand, etc. But they wanted to change him to that cartoon. Sammy Callahan, the same thing happened with him. That's the reason why he ended up taking the door out as well when he was in NXT. They just didn't. He did not. None of them wanted to be changed into that WWE system. I guess the cartoon gimmick, or not even that it's cartoony now, but it's their brand, so to speak.
The rebranding of as soon as you walk in the door, they got to rebrand you. And I think Triple H is going to kind of move away from that. I think he's going to let guys kind of take, for what they've built on the indies over the years. If they are indie wrestlers, he'll let them bring it in with them. But I still think they're going to develop the athletes who are not from a pro wrestling background too. I think they're going to kind of find a middle ground so that they can. I mean, you got to remember too, a lot of guys, that we see now were not indie. Was Brock Lesnar was not an indie wrestler. Bobby Lashley was not an indie wrestler to start his career. They were guys who came to WWE and they were molded into pro wrestlers. They were athletes.
Did Bobby go through the OVW system at the time?
Yeah, I believe he did. If you remember, when we talked to our friend Chili Willie about a year and a half ago, he talked about, I believe, being there with Bobby. And
right. That's right. Yeah, I remember Brock definitely.
And I've heard Cornette talk about experience of Bobby in OVW too. So
okay. Yeah, I believe that. I remember Brock because Brock had didn't he have a notable feud in OVW with Cena, if I remember correctly?
He may have. I wasn't watching it so much at the time, but yeah, it's and again, Brock was not an independent wrestler. He was an amateur wrestler. He was a collegiate wrestler, and they recruited him. Jim Ross recruited him, and he brought him in. And next thing you know, I mean, so I think you're going to see indie wrestlers, but I think they're still going to develop other athletes with no indie experience as well. I think they're going to kind of cross over with both.
I think that's possible, but obviously, if you've I know you've been on the internet reading as of late some of the stories that they've had where they just recently had a tryout or a performance center tryout. And a lot
Yeah.
of these guys, he said, what made them decide to go back to hiring indie wrestlers because there was the rule that was set, earlier this year, that they're not going to be looking at indie wrestlers anymore. There's no way that they're not going to hire. So I guess the most recent tryout was not very good. There was a lot of, they just wanted to go for straight athletes and entertainers or whatever. And some of these guys ended up getting hurt and injured, concussed. So they said, fuck this. I'm going to start looking at indie wrestlers again. We know, some of these guys know what they're doing.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think they're going to do a lot more of that. But I mean, you also look at your Ronda Rouseys, your Bianca Belairs. They weren't indie wrestlers. You know what I mean? So,
Yes.
so I think there is potential to still bring in some athletes, but to solely do that and totally disregard the independent scene, that was no way that was going to happen for long. No way.
No, but even still at that time period, you know how many times Vince has changed his mind and went back on doing things after he decided that he was unhappy with the way things were. I'm sure if he had a tryout, that if he had the same situation, he probably would have been like, well, screw this. This just isn't working. Maybe.
I think that one of the telltale signs, and this is way before Vince, announced his retirement, but the signing of Cody Rhodes, because here you are, you're going back to, I mean, Cody is look where he comes from. Right. I mean, he's as pure a wrestler as you can get in the sense of a wrestling background and history, and they brought him in as Cody Rhodes. They acknowledge his history. So I think that was kind of like the first sign, like, ooh, things might be turning back to that direction,
They brought in, they let him use his AEW music that was written for him there. So it's a sign of acknowledging his past that was written into his contract, I believe, that he wanted to acknowledge his history, etc., and that he had some of his creative say.
And you have to wonder if you remember how long that the negotiations went with that. You got to wonder if all this stuff weren't kind of holding up the works. Like if Cody was like, yeah, if you can't give me this, I'm not coming. And Vince saying, well, I don't want to give you that. And then, prolong the negotiations a little bit. Who knows? I mean, we'll never know, but he's there now. And
yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said, we'll never know, but there was rumors. It's like, oh, I don't think it's happening. You know what I mean? It seems like it's not happening. It's taken too long. But, when that, on that day, when his music hit and he came out from under the stage, like that entire arena went entirely crazy. They absolutely went nuts. They loved it.
Which again, it's like a year ago, you wouldn't have expected. You wouldn't. If somebody told you we were going to have this conversation about WWE and indie wrestlers and Triple H being in charge and Cody coming back, a year ago we would have both said you're nuts. It's not happening.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's exciting. It's really exciting. Did you catch any of Dynamite last night?
It's funny that you said that. But I'm going to go with the word no. I did not. I know you text me. Now, mind you, I was working, and I ended up getting a little bit under the weather. When I came home from work, normally, I miss about the first half hour of it. Me and Marcel usually go live Thursdays and discuss it, but he was unable to today, so I didn't end up watching it. So you text me saying that it was a train wreck, basically. And then I went to work today, and a couple people there were just like literally telling me that the same exact thing, that it was not a good episode at all. That there was some good moments, there was some good matches, but as a whole, it was not that great.
My memory, if you know me, my memory is not that good. So I can't go match for match, segment by segment on the show. I will say I texted you during the opening match, which was Darby Allin and Brody King. Okay, Brody King's really growing on me. I actually like Darby Allin too. I think he's just very different.
Yeah.
But dude, they were bleeding like 2 or 3 minutes into the match already, and I'm not talking about. I mean, they were just hardcore bleeding already. To me, I think AEW for me is kind of crossing the line over the shock value line. It's like it seems to me when I watch that program, everything is done for shock value, not for good wrestling. And there is some good wrestling. I'm not saying there isn't, but it's like to have this brawl to open up the show and you're bleeding. And then from what I hear, I didn't stay tuned till the very end, but apparently they were bleeding all over in the Jericho
Moxley.
Moxley
Yeah.
match at the very end too. And it's like, you know, sometimes less is more. And if I see blood in like every other match, it's not gonna mean a whole lot to me after a while. You know, it's just gonna become part of the whole, oh yeah, they're bleeding again.
I
And then
think
not only
you're.
that, but during that match, it was like, all of a sudden the lights go out
Yep.
for maybe a good 10 seconds. A House of Black appears. Then the House of Black has to get in the ring and start beating up Darby Allin. And then Sting comes out, and it felt very Russo, WCW, NWO ish in a lot of ways.
That's not.
Just overbooked.
That's the thing with AEW. I really enjoyed it for quite some time from the beginning. Some of it I find, me and you are somewhat similar in a way that we like very traditional professional wrestling in a way.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way when we're brought up rather, that's what we watched. But as time goes on, it's like watching a car crash each and every week. There's got to be blood every week. There's got to be a shocking moment every week. There's got to be a surprise every week. There has to be another surprise every week. The backstage segments, the interviews, the angles, some of that stuff is not very good. It's not entertaining. Some of the backstage stuff.
Yeah,
Leave
they
it to the
definitely need.
matches. The
They
matches,
definitely. Yeah, go ahead.
the matches themselves, I think, hold up for the most part. And I'm sorry to cut you off again. I'll let you
No,
take
you're
this
good.
in a second. But I think the matches themselves, for the most part, are generally very good. It's just it's the other stuff that's trying to sell the show that's not doing a very good job of selling the show. So, and like you said, that there's blood every week, or there's certain things that, like you said, less is more, and that's how you build the product. It's like if you're watching CZW every week, what the hell's going on there? There's a death match each and every week. You're going to get tired of death matches. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, and there used to be the old golden rule in pro wrestling, and I know TV formats change everything, and it kind of like what I'm talking about is like you had the lowest prelim match and you built up to the main event, right? Yeah.
Right.
So it was like
Correct.
least important, and then it would go up a little bit, and then you had the most important at the end of the night. I know TV formats and everything change that, so you don't always open up with a prelim match. Sometimes you open up with a hot match or whatever. But there used to be the golden rule. Like if there's blood in the main event, you don't bleed in any other match. If they're going to brawl if they're going to brawl outside the ring in the main event, you don't brawl outside the ring in the previous matches. That way, when it finally happened at the end of the night, it was more shocking. It was more like, whoa. But when you see it in every match leading up to it, it numbs you. It desensitizes
Yes.
you.
Yeah.
And like I said, Brody King and Darby Allin, I'd love to watch those guys wrestle almost any night of the week, but like they didn't have to have everybody get involved. Everybody does run-ins. Your boy, and then then they had a little vignette later on with the Billy and the Ass Boys and your boy Danhausen there. I'm not going to bust your balls about Danhausen, but my
Come
God,
on,
why is
man.
that guy on national television? I don't know. It's like they really Tony Khan could really benefit from somebody to really come in there and help him produce a more fluid show.
Put together a great series of matches. Let the main event be the main event. Let that, you know what I'm saying? Build that up as if it's the main event. Hype it up throughout the entire match. or evening, you don't have to have blood. You don't have to have chairs. Every show has chairs, tables, some sort of weapon.
Every
Except
segment has an angle. Every segment has a run-in. It's just way too much. Way too, because I'm sitting here the next day and I got a bad memory anyway. But I couldn't remember if you would have called me at 11 o'clock last night. I couldn't remember half of what I saw. Just too much, overbooked, too much.
now, when we grew up watching things like WWF Superstars and Wrestling Challenge or Worldwide Wrestling, a lot of it was just prelim matches for
Yeah.
an entire hour. We'd get prelim matches once in a while. I mean, NWA had them more, so you'd get like a somewhat television main event where it'd be two, mid card guys most of the time. You know what I mean? NWA featured it more, not so much WWF. You'd have to stay up on Mondays to watch prime time to see something like that. So, but they had ways of building it up through the interviews and such that made you care about the product and made you interested in getting to that live event, because that's where the stuff really happened. AEW does this, and I'm not saying WWE is not guilty of it. WWE is guilty of it as well, but they just try to do everything they possibly can on television so that you don't click that channel, because they want you to stay tuned. And a lot of it is, personal opinion, pure garbage. I'm just going to say
it all changed in the late '90s. What you're saying was the blueprint. It was kind of like you had your job matches, and then you had a main event with a not even like a true main event. You might have
a feature matchup.
Andre the Giant against Sweet Hansen or something like that.
Right.
Everybody knew Sweet Hansen was going to lose, but he would win a match here and there. But the point was, though, when Andre fought Blackjack Mulligan or Big John Studd, you wanted to go buy a ticket to see it at the arena because you'd never see that match on TV.
Right.
In the late '90s, it became more ratings driven, where all of a sudden they had to pump these ratings up so that they can get these better TV deals. So all of a sudden you're seeing people like Stone Cold, people like The Rock wrestling every week on TV. And so the blueprint that you speak of, I thought that was best for selling tickets to the arenas, but as we move forward, selling the tickets to the arena isn't as important as the TV ratings, and the pay-per-view buys, I guess.
Right. One of the things that they would always do the hype. They would always do the localized hype ads. I'd watch and you'd see the New Haven Coliseum or Hartford Civic Center. You'd probably get Nassau Coliseum where you live.
Yeah.
Ads.
The Garden. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was exciting when they said, hey, WWF is coming to the New Haven Coliseum and Hulk Hogan's going to fight, I don't even know, the Big Boss Man or whoever. It was exciting, and they would hype it, and they show the localized promos. You'd sit there and beg obviously we were kids at the time. You'd sit there and beg your parents to go buy a $10, $20 ticket just to take you. You can take the entire family for $100 back then.
It's to go back even further, like the Bob Backlund era, let's say, okay? So you'd see Bob Backlund, and then he'd get attacked on, he'd come out. It was so funny because he would come out and he'd come out at the beginning of the program and say, for the next hour, I'm going to do this Harvard step test to prove my stamina. I'm going to do it at ringside. So he'd be there through every prelim match. Maybe a heel would come by and kind of say something to him or snicker at him, but, just to show that they were the heel and he was the face. And then in the main event, the Masked Superstar come defeat Salvatore Bellomo, and then he'd go and attack Bob Backlund and leave him laying on the floor. So what do you want to do? You got to buy a ticket to go see him at your local arena. You got to see Bob get his revenge against the Masked Superstar, right? That's how it used to work.
Yeah. And like you said, now it's like house shows don't even matter, even though they do happen. During the pandemic, they stopped live events, house shows. They started doing them again, but I guess they're just definitely way less than they are. But everything is, man, I need to go to the next Monday Night Raw. I need to go to the next Dynamite. I need to go to the next SmackDown because I need to know. I need to be there in person if it's going to happen. But dude, not for nothing, nothing is driving me to go to Raw or SmackDown or even Dynamite. I went to one Dynamite. It was a pretty decent show, but I wasn't, nothing's telling me, they've come to New York, I think twice since, and about an hour away. I could have gone. And nothing was telling me I needed to go to that. You know what I mean? Here.
I've been to a few house shows since I moved to North Carolina back in 2008, but the last major production, whether it be a Raw or a pay-per-view, it was in 2008 up in New York. And looking back on it, it wasn't as bad then. I think it's worse now, as far as the live action. But even back then, it was like you'd sit there for a 2 or 3 hour Raw, whatever it was at the time. It was like you're sitting there, you're watching segments on the big screen, you can't even hear what they're saying, the acoustics are bad. And it's just like, looking back at it now, I'm like, I don't know if you could pay me to go to see like a Raw or a SmackDown tape. You know what I mean? There's just so much dead time in the arena. It's just, I'll stay at home.
I went to SmackDown once last year, and I went to Survivor Series. They were both on the same weekend. I went, it was Survivor Series 2 days before, SmackDown 2 days before Survivor Series. And the reason why I ended up at Survivor Series the morning of SmackDown is a friend of my wife's who's a huge WWE fan asked me if I wanted to go. She's like, we can get, they got $30 tickets in Brooklyn. So I said, and why the hell not? Why the hell not? I tell you, I'll never make that trip ever again. Between the drive,
You told me that.
sitting in the arena, the seating in that Barclays Center is atrocious for a gentleman of my size. There's no leg room because I am tall. And it just was not a good show. There was nothing selling me on. I thought the SmackDown was way better. I mean, it wasn't a fantastic show by any means, but I thought it was off the charts better than Survivor Series was for sure. The two dark matches I thought were better than anything.
I just lost my train of thought, but no, that's what I was going to say is, so I'm going to contradict myself here, but house shows, if you go to a house show, they're kind of, for the most part, kind of run of the mill. You're not going to see any major title changes. Who knows? Maybe the new regime will start doing crazy stuff like that. But you're just going to see the general show. That's all you're going to get.
It's like going to the circus.
But that being said, we went back in January in Fayetteville. You watch them at the house shows, and it's a whole different atmosphere. The cameras are off. The wrestlers are having fun. They're interacting with the fans at ringside. I mean, when I say interacting with the fans at ringside, they're stopping and signing stuff while they're, coming to and exiting the ring. So, if you have a young family, house show's the way to go to me. It's it's probably going to be cheaper. It might be a little more interactive if you can get that close down there. It's
When I was younger, I always enjoyed going to house shows way more than going to, say, television tapings. I enjoyed television tapings. There was a different atmosphere. You'd probably get maybe 6 matches, right? 5, 6 matches on a house show, maybe 7. The thing with that always struck me is you got to see preliminary guys go out there that would normally get squashed in 3 minutes on television. You'd see them go out there for 15, 20 minutes and work a professional wrestling match. You got to see, Jimmy Powers and Iron Mike Sharp. You got to see Paul Roma and Bob Bradley work for 20 minutes, stuff like that. And that was always something. That's what convinced me, hey, man, those guys are actually really good wrestlers, opposed to, go ahead.
You go back and watch like a lot of the MSG house shows from the early 80s. Yeah. Eddie Gilbert, Kurt Hennig, Salvatore Bellomo, all these guys were in opening matches. They're going to, there's one, that I love to death. It's Eddie Gilbert against SD Jones, and they go to a 20-minute Broadway, a babyface Broadway, 20 minutes to open the show. And it's like those matches, they were just great matches. There was most of them didn't have any kind of background or storyline to them.
Right.
Those guys worked their butts off for 10, 15, sometimes 20 minutes.
Yeah. You got to see Tony Garea. There was one that I watched from the 70s. It was Tony Garea opening up the show against, another guy. I can't think offhand, but it was just like, damn. I said, this is a really great technical match. I said, this is, and the crowd literally at that time didn't seem to care. That's the weird part about it. They never cared about the opening matches a lot of times.
But yeah, it's a different time, man. And yeah, we don't even have. It's funny because we don't even have like when we were kids. You could tune in every week and you'd see Pete Sanchez or you'd see.
Yeah.
You knew who you knew who they were, right? Now it's kind of like they'll find a local guy for the one night and he'll come out, and they only do it with certain wrestlers though. Veer Mahan being probably the most recent. You bring in the local guy, Veer Mahan squashes them in a minute, and but they don't really have a roster of jobbers or ham and eggers, as Bobby the Brain would say. God rest his soul. But so again, the business is just changing and evolving, and old guys like you and I have to kind of figure it out. But
I'm still having fun watching it. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely, love what is going on in a lot of different professional wrestling organizations today. I'm not just sitting here trashing WWE or AEW. I watch everything. I do watch AEW. Don't get me wrong. I watch WWE. Everybody hears me each week here on this podcast talking about it. I don't. I say what I like about it, and then I say what I don't like about it. And then I'll just hype up whatever I do like of other organizations. There's a lot out there today. If you don't like something, there's going to be an organization for your taste out there. There's going to be a wrestling promotion for your taste. If you like old school wrestling, give the NWA or Championship Wrestling from Hollywood a try. There's a lot of organizations like that if you just like good old fashioned wrestling.
Yeah, I think one that I've been a fan of for years, and I'll be honest, since the pandemic, I kind of haven't been following as closely. But MLW is another one. They've always kind of got that throwback old school feel, but with a kind of a new spin to it. Yeah. Like you said, there's so much out there. The problem is there's so much out there, so there's really like too much out there.
Yeah,
especially
it's hard to keep up. If it's hard to keep up with everything if you want. So it's like obviously I can't keep up with everything. I try to at least read about it, but it's hard to actually sit down and watch, especially with someone like a work schedule such as mine, where I'm working, 6 days a week, 12-hour days. So it's really hard to keep up with everything.
Especially if you're going to try to keep up with the two major promotions, AEW and WWE, because just the content they put out every week is a ton,
right
between the two of them. So you kind of got to pick and choose, you get a little bit of this, get a little bit of that, maybe watch a condensed version on Hulu of Raw or something like that, because 3 hours of Raw is way too long. We all know that. Which brings me to something else. I've heard a lot of speculation. Everybody's hoping and praying that Triple H is going to cut Raw back to 2 hours. But something I was thinking about, is that possible? Because I don't know what the deal is with USA. Would USA let them do something like that?
My understanding is that when they made it 3 hours, it was I don't know if it was at the demand, but for lack of a better term, that it was that USA was the ones that wanted it.
Right.
So it was an interview that resurfaced from a couple years back. Triple H, I'm not exactly sure where it was, maybe Sports Illustrated or something, where he was quoted as saying that if there was anything he could change, about Monday Night Raw, that he would go back to 2 hours. If that is at all possible, that could benefit the show quite a bit. You could have a faster paced show while still putting on quality wrestling. Do you realize that? I know it's not 100% what it should be, but there has been somewhat more wrestling on the broadcast and for the last couple of weeks. And I know there's still been the same amount of backstage bullshit, but it's just like the matches are longer and have been pretty decent quality. And I have a feeling that, we're only a couple weeks into his new position here. So we got to give it time to actually see the full effect.
I mean, you look at SmackDown. SmackDown for the last, maybe the last year or so, it's like they utilize their 2 hours a whole lot better than Raw utilizes their three. Just because
Right.
once you get to 3 hours, it's too much time to fill. I'm sorry, I don't
Yeah.
care how much talent you have. It's too much time to fill. Too many. It's just too much. But SmackDown's been really good for over a year now, and
Yeah.
and it's not big. For 2 hours, it's not like everybody's getting 5-minute matches. They're doing longer matches on SmackDown than they are on Raw.
Because a
It's
lot of
just
times
crazy.
they'll only do like 2 or 3 matches if you think about it, but they're having longer matches in that 2 hours. I calculated when I went, I believe that there was 3 matches at the one that I went to. I'm not counting the dark matches that took place. I'm talking about on the actual broadcast. It was actually only 3 matches, but I'm like, the matches had pretty decent time to them.
Right. Whereas like Raw, you always hear these nightmares like, oh, the first hour had 2 matches and they had a total of 3 minutes pro wrestling in the first hour or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Raw's
I
just
know. I'd say during the Attitude Era, maybe the Ruthless Aggression era, that was totally possible. But I think that they're added more time to it, and made it somewhat better.
and
At least.
yeah, I'm very curious to see where the pro wrestling landscape goes. As we kind of come full circle on this conversation, but
Yeah.
there's a couple other things that we haven't talked about. Do you have any more notes there, sir?
As far as that stuff goes, no, but I would like to say that we've had 2 passings this past week in the world of professional wrestling. The legendary judo Gene Lebell has passed away. Let's see, he was 89 years old. Okay. Born 1932 and passed away August 9th, which was just 2 days ago. This man was legendary, probably the precursor or started the precursor to mixed martial arts, one of the very first guys that would get in there with, other forms of discipline. He would jiu-jitsu black belt. He held a lot of titles, believe it or not. And let's see, I believe that he instructed, didn't he instruct Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee, and Steven Seagal that he worked with?
He may have.
Yeah. So, and I believe that he ran the NWA territory for a number of years, Hollywood wrestling out I believe it started in the later 60s and then ran through the 80s.
It was certainly a steady figure on the pro wrestling scene, even up to his last days, really.
Yeah. Very well known. Do you want to throw in any other lines about Judo Gene?
I mean, the reputation speaks for itself. When you have, people from the pro wrestling business from the last 50 years, I mean, right up to the modern day people like Ronda Rousey speaking out on you, you made an impact. So rest in peace, Gene Lebell.
Not only that, Mike Masters, aka Rocky Jones, who was a Northeast staple for many, many decades. Believe that he wrestled for 5 decades. 6 decades, according to my notes here. He was 68 years old. He started doing jobs in the WWF. Of course, I'm familiar with him mostly working for the Savoldis, ICW, IWCCW, etc. And he went on to found the East Coast Professional Wrestling School and Promotion with Gino Caruso. So I want to say rest in peace, Rocky Jones.
Yeah, Rocky, that one hit home for me when I was a kid in the 80s. Independent wrestling was not like right now. It's like independent wrestling. Everybody knows about it. It wasn't like that back then. You might get a rare show that you might see, your pro wrestling coming this Friday night, and you just assume it's the TV guys. It's not necessarily. You might get, somebody who's cast off, who just left WWF or whatever. But, you and I have talked about a guy named Mark Tendler. He's the guy who, my uncle trained with, and he used to promote shows on Long Island, a little town called Shirley, and it was the East End Arena. And Rocky Jones was there every single month, and he was probably most months he was probably the top baby face, unless Bruno Jr. was there, because they ran the Bruno Jr. versus Larry Zbyszko feud through there, and Rocky Jones was always like, if not the top baby face, the second top baby on the card. So yeah. Not only that, but Rocky's trained with or has trained, some friends of mine over the years. I know he worked closely with Kodiak Bear, as far as training people. Another Northeast indie guy, Kodiak Bear. But no, Rocky, and a funny story about Rocky. Okay, so, and I might get this slightly twisted, but I went to a Pro Wrestling USA show, and Slaughter, that was when Slaughter joined the AWA. So Slaughter was, I want to say Slaughter fought Kendo Nagasaki on that show. But Slaughter was on a card, and in the preliminary match, the opening match, they had, and this is years after Private Jim Nelson, like he wasn't even around anymore, but they had a preliminary match. Private Nelson was in the preliminary match. Well, I'm thinking, oh man, it's going to be the old Private Jim Nelson, right? Well, lo and behold, it's Rocky Jones with the American, the camouflage and everything. I wish I had photos of it. So Rocky's been everywhere and done everything, from Hawaii to California to Japan. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't know he was as traveled as he was until, his passing. I just knew him as Rocky Jones, the indie wrestler.
Yeah, there was a great article up on him about after his passing up on slamwrestling.com. Go check it out. It's very good. Yeah, man. I was just mostly familiar with him from his Savoldi days. That's it.
Yeah, our old buddy Greg Oliver did a great job with that article on Rocky Jones.
Yeah, former guest here on the PWZ podcast. Yeah, there was a lot of really cool stuff. I'm sorry, he had a lot of really cool experience. Like he was out there. There was like you said, indie wrestling was different back in the day. It wasn't televised each and every week. There wasn't there was no internet either. So
the other thing about Rocky too is how old was he at his passing? He was not a young man.
68 years old.
68. So he wasn't like a 40-year-old guy. He was, nope. He still had life to live, but throat cancer unfortunately took him. But Rocky was still wrestling until recent. I mean, very recently, and he looked great. If you saw recent photos of him, I'd see he'd post photos on Facebook and stuff. He was in phenomenal shape. So yeah, just very sad. From what I understand too, I think it was it Tommy Dreamer, I think, was talking about him, and Tommy Dreamer says, listen, the poor guy died from throat cancer. The guy never smoked a cigarette a day in his life, but it just happened, man.
Yeah, things like that could happen. People don't realize it. I believe the same thing. Did the same thing happen to Dr. Death? Didn't he die of throat cancer?
Was it throat cancer? I don't remember, but yeah,
I believe that. Yeah. So, Andy, do you have anything else you'd like to speak about?
Not particularly. Just having a good time here. Don't forget to check out the T-shirts are on sale tonight, aren't they?
Yeah, go check it out. You can go to the link, pwzpodcast.com, 35% off throughout the whole entire weekend. And yeah, T-shirts as low as $14. You guys should go get your one. There's a bunch of new designs up there. So if you want them, go get them. Lots of fun. Coffee mugs, all that fun stuff. Andy, where can you be found?
Well, just right there. I'm not good at this. Right there.
Right there. There you go.
Just look me up on Twitter. I'll be there. You'll find me, and that's about it.
That's it. All right. Don't forget to check out any of the links. PWZ Podcast for Twitter and Facebook, and PWZ Network on Instagram. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great night, everybody.